Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. We'll give it about a minute to see people trickle in. Hope everyone enjoyed the opening keynote. So glad to see you in this space. Give it a few more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So hello, and thank you all so much for joining us for this session. My name is Moya Kirker, and I'll be moderating the session. I'm glad to welcome you to the session, Leading from Within, Cultivating a Person-Centered Culture for Meaningful Change. Before we get started, let's go over a few logistical items. This session is being recorded. Captions are available during the session by clicking on the bottom of your Zoom window, the closed caption button. Um, Please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to do this anonymously. There will be 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of this session. And this presentation is going to invite you to reflect as well. So try to keep the questions there and the reflection in the chat so that we can sort of sift through them a little more easily. Please use the chat for general comments or technical issues. Shanti is here with us and she'll be monitoring the chat for any questions and comments. Shanti will also be adding some links into the chat. One is for collaborative resource sharing. If you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in Calm's Resources Zotero or in the chat. One of our volunteers will drop this information into the chat, and then there will also be a link for a reminder about our conference code of conduct. And now it's with great pleasure that I turn things over to our presenters to introduce themselves and get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session, Leading from Within, Cultivating a Person-Centered Culture for Meaningful Change. My name is Laura Edwards. I'm Director of Systems and Discovery at EKU Libraries, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Ashley Cole, Director of Collection Strategies.
And I'm Trenia Napier, Director of Teaching and Learning. Before we get started, let's take a moment to reflect. Take a few minutes right now to think of a challenge in your own library, one that feels particularly difficult or kind of sticky. One of those projects or shifts where, despite your best efforts, you haven't been able to find much traction. We invite you to throw your project or problem into the chat, but you're also welcome just to jot it down on paper for yourself, whatever works for you. So let's take a few minutes right now to do that. Oh, yeah, Kelsey, that sounds like a tough one. So Kelsey says that she's really trying to focus on this conference, but they're not allowed enough staff to cover the desk at any point. So they're just consistently being pulled away. And so staffing is a struggle. And I think that's probably something a lot of us feel. Oh, Kelly, That's one I think that that theme you might see a little bit in our comments as well. So Kelly shares that their library is currently just not being valued by their administration, and they're being asked to do more with less support. Yes, no matter the challenge, communication becomes an additional challenge on top of our challenges. Oh, yes, creating impactful strategic plan goals. I think that's always challenging. And then if you are really trying to gather information from your library to represent different voices in different areas, it becomes even more challenging. Ooh, hostile legislation. Also might somewhat be a theme in ours, although not maybe not referenced super directly. Low morale, lack of trust between departments, and between groups. So within the library itself, between staff and librarians, admin and everyone else. Um, I see someone talking about doing a reorganization, and it's really difficult to take on both figuring out that work and people mourning the work that once was and being threatened by the work that they are not sure is coming down the pipeline. They don't know what it'll look like. And on that note, I think that's a good moment for us to kind of transition a little ourselves and get into it. So, as we hold these challenges in mind, I want us to ask ourselves, what about this situation makes it so hard to move forward? Is it a lack of data, a lack of a better workflow, or is it something less tangible? We'd like you to keep that specific challenge that you noted in mind as we walk through our experience at EKU. We're going to explore what happens when we stop looking at that stickiness as a problem to be solved and start looking at it as a human experience to be supported.
So this project really started with a question that may sound familiar to a lot of you, and it kind of came up in the chat. Why is the library budget so big? Isn't everything free online? And that was a real question that came from a university administrator here on our campus. And honestly, that question really reflected a much bigger shift that was happening around us. Kentucky is a performance-based funding state. And for us, this means that university funding is tied heavily to student success and degree completion. Libraries don't graduate students directly, so internally we started asking ourselves, how do we explain our contributions to those outcomes? How do we demonstrate that the library is a part of student success in a meaningful and in a visible way? For a long time, we were comfortable talking about our value in familiar ways, such as relationships and instruction, collections, and faculty support. But those conversations were challenging. Institutional leaders were increasingly wanting libraries to explain impact at a broader organizational level. And internally, we were realizing that we didn't really have a shared way to tell that story yet. In response, we began exploring a more intentional and coordinated way to connect library collections, instruction, outreach, and student learning to academic programs that our liaison librarians supported. That work eventually became what we call program plans. The goal was not simply collecting more information or reporting process or adding another reporting process. It was creating a more coordinated and institutionally meaningful way to demonstrate library impact. Many of our liaisons had developed highly individualized approaches to their work over time, and that autonomy was professionally meaningful, but it also made it difficult to communicate our impact in coordinated or institutionally aligned way. So while that question itself was the trigger, it wasn't actually the core challenge. The real challenge was helping liaison librarians feel safe. We wanted them to feel safe enough to rethink long established ways of working. So, to help us make sense of what we're experiencing organizationally, we started looking more closely at Lewin and Shine's work on organizational change. And some of you may be familiar with this, but we're going to run through it a little rather quickly. Lewin's framework describes change as a process of unfreezing, change, and then refreezing. So, that first stage, unfreezing, involves disrupting existing assumptions and helping people recognize that their current ways of working may no longer be sufficient. The change stage is the second change, and it is where stage is the second stage is where new approaches, behaviors, and ways of thinking begin to emerge. And then the final stage is refreezing, and that focuses on stabilizing those changes so they become more integrated into culture and add daily work, more integrated into culture and daily work of the organization. So, what made this framework useful for us is that it helped us realize that organizational change is much more complex than simple implementing a new process or structure. And that became important for us because what we were experiencing internally often wasn't simply disagreement about strategy. What we were seeing was actually uncertainty about identity, uncertainty about expectations, expertise, and professional change. And that felt more personal. So the framework gave us a more useful way to interpret what we were seeing and ultimately shaped how we approached that work moving forward. So, what became especially useful for us was Shine's expansion of Lewin's model, particularly his explanation of survival anxiety and learning anxiety. So, for Shine, unfreezing is shaped by a tension between those two forces. Survival anxiety is the pressure people feel when they realize change may be necessary. For us, that included growing institutional pressure around accountability, student success, and demonstrating library impact more visibly. But learning anxiety is different. It shows up as a fear associated with the change itself. It's the fear of looking incompetent, uncertainty about expectations, losing credibility, and even being asked to work in unfamiliar ways. And what we realized very quickly is that learning anxiety was often stronger than survival anxiety. Liaison librarians understood the institutional pressure and they understood those changing expectations, but the process of changing long established professional practices just felt too risky. And honestly, uncertainty often just felt more immediate than the urgency itself. So many of our liaisons were asking themselves questions like, what does this mean for my role? Am I still doing this work correctly? Will I be successful working this way? And what happens if I fail? And if that happens publicly, like what does that mean? And so those anxieties mattered. They mattered very much to us because when people feel pressured to change, they often experience the change itself as threatening. Not because they're trying to be difficult, I think that's an important distinction, but because uncertainty around competence and expectations and professional identity, again, it can feel very personal. And so that distinction became incredibly important for us as leaders. So Sheen argues that when learning anxiety becomes too high, people often respond in protective ways. And we started recognizing those patterns in our own library. Sometimes that looks like denial. And that can come out as this doesn't apply to us, or our departments already know the library's value. It could be bargaining. Can I do this differently? Or just maybe not at all. Does every liaison really need to approach this the same way? It can also be seen as scapegoating. So, is this happening because of them? There's always a them. Um, this is really just about the administration wanting more data. And once we started recognizing these reactions as forms of protection rather than defensiveness or just simple resistance, it changed how we interpreted the situation. Because our librarians weren't necessarily resisting the goals themselves, again, they were just trying to protect their own stability, their autonomy, competence, their professional identity. And recognizing that helped us respond more thoughtfully instead of simply increasing pressure. So, we're going to have another reflection moment now that you've learned about those behaviors. We're going to go back to the challenge that you identified at the beginning of the session. And I would like, now that we've talked about learning anxiety, if you can just take a moment to think about what kinds of protective responses might be showing up around that challenge. Have you seen examples of denial or bargaining or scapegoating? Maybe it sounds like this doesn't apply to us, or can we just keep doing what's already working? So I invite you to throw some of those statements into the chat, and I'm going to give you a minute or so to do that. And Laura will talk us through a couple of those examples.
So Megan just dropped in the chat that they're seeing all of the examples of all of those behaviors actually that you just described. They're seeing those during a reorganization that her library is going through right now. She said that the scapegoating and denial are definitely key roadblocks for them. And Elizabeth says that she tends to see behaviors of like denial and bargaining with some recent procedural changes. Rebecca just shared that she's had an example of denial where I don't have the time to do this. This is not my responsibility. There's somebody who's sucketing what Rebecca just shared. When anything goes wrong, our dean blames the DH instead of working with her to resolve the issue. So there's some examples of scapegoating. Madeline knows that denial is really tough when you're trying to build buy-in or get ideas from on-the-ground experts for how to craft better outcomes. And so nobody proposes alternative approaches that might work better or more cheaply. And Mark says that he definitely sees more examples of denial and bargaining than scapegoating at the place that he works at.
Okay, so those are really great examples. And I think that what became important for us as leaders was recognizing that those types of reactions weren't random. I think this realization changed our leadership approach more than anything else, because once we stopped viewing those reactions simply as resistance, we started recognizing that our liaisons, again, were just trying to navigate that uncertainty. And that shifted the kind of questions that we began to ask as leaders. So instead of how do I push this forward faster, which is my primary, that's how where I operate from. We can shift it from that to how do we make this more manageable? How do we reduce fear around the process itself? And how do you create conditions where our librarians feel more capable of participating in that change? And honestly, sometimes that helps things move faster. Those questions ultimately changed how we approach leadership during this process. So once we understood resistance differently, our focus shifted toward reducing that learning anxiety. These strategies intentionally sit across the stage 1 of unfreezing and stage 2 of change. They helped move liaisons through unfreezing because they also became the conditions that supported change itself. Sheen argues that movement becomes possible when leaders create conditions where people feel safe enough to learn. And that became the foundation for how we approach this work. I'm going to just walk you through each of these strategies just really quickly. A compelling vision is something that helps people understand why the work matters. Positive models show that change is possible and that it's achievable. Targeted training reduces ambiguity by providing clear guidance and support. Collective learning normalizes uncertainty by allowing people to learn together rather than independently. Communities of practice create ongoing spaces for collaboration, discussion, and shared problem solving. Learner control preserves a sense of autonomy during the change process. Safe experimentation creates opportunities to try, revise, adjust without fear of punishment or embarrassment. And aligned structures reinforce the change through organizational expectations and systems. So, none of these strategies eliminate uncertainty completely, but together they can make the process feel more manageable and collaborative and sustainable, and sometimes a bit easier. And the next few slides that we're going to go through will show you how we intentionally use these strategies to support people through the change process at our library.
So at this phase of the stage of the change process, we just want to make clear that the process of change itself is very messy and uncertain. So even if people have accepted that change needs to happen, they're very likely to go back to their previous habits and ways of doing things if they don't feel comfortable. So in order for change to happen, people need to feel safe. And so here are some of the things that we've done to create that safe environment for our people at EKU. So what did this look like in practice here? What did we do to help people feel safe? So first, it is critical to share a compelling vision that people want to be part of, that they're willing to do the work to make it happen. At EKU, we crafted a vision that framed program plans as evidence of library impact on student success. By mapping our information literacy outcomes onto student learning outcomes and linking our collections to academic programs or even specific courses in those programs through our program plans, we could concretely and collectively communicate with university administration how the library aligned with institutional priorities. First, we shared our vision with our dean and senior leadership. Our dean quickly recognized how important the program plans would be for her as she advocated for the library with the university administration. Here was the evidence that she could leverage during conversations with administrators and stakeholders on campus. Once we had the support of our leadership, we started sharing the vision with the rest of the library to start building internal understanding. At this point, questions about the budget were circulating on campus, and our librarians were starting to worry that this would lead to increased scrutiny of the library. This was definitely the administrative pressure that was creating urgency for change. We addressed this stress by sharing our vision of how program plans would help us respond to these challenges. This helped our liaisons understand the role they had in developing program plans that would demonstrate the library's impact on student outcomes.
Okay. I think we're a little off on the slides, maybe. Okay, here we are. Sorry. But as we know, understanding a role and actually performing a role are two very different things, especially when the work feels unfamiliar and the stakes feel high. Once liaisons understood the why, our focus shifted to lowering the learning anxiety of the how. One of the most effective ways to do that is to provide positive models. So we didn't start by asking all 20 of our liaisons to change at once. We started with a small program plan ad hoc group whose members represented the different areas of our library and included both early and mid to late career librarians. This group of positive models also became our first community of practice and served as early explorers. They did the messy first draft work of determining what our program plans would look like and developing a process that worked for our campus context. And by diving into literature about curriculum mapping, testing out models, and making the initial mistakes, and honestly, the mistakes that actually feel a bit bigger and more threatening in a safe and small environment where navigating trial and error was more manageable. So by the time we rolled out the whole process to our full liaison group, our positive models had already created process roadmaps and templates for everyone to engage with. But more importantly, they served as proof that change was survivable. So when a colleague you trust says, I tried this, it was hard, but here's a template that works, the anxiety of the unknown drops significantly. At that point, you're no longer a lone learner struggling in isolation, but you are instead a part of a collective learning effort where everyone benefits from and contributes to a shared experience. So, building on the work of those early explorers, we realized that for program plans to be sustainable, our core functions needed shared foundations that worked for everyone, regardless of their background or role. A major source of learning anxiety is the fear of losing one's professional identity or looking incompetent in a new system. So at this point in our process, I was actually the associate director of teaching and learning. Our then director worried that this could be especially challenging for our liaisons who don't have a background in teaching or whose current roles have shifted them away from the classroom. To address this, our instruction and archives teams collaborated to develop program level information literacy outcomes aligned with the ACRL framework. We made each learning outcome visible by including examples, assignments, activities of how students might engage with the outcome or how we might see it sort of showing up in the classroom or curriculum. On the surface, this looks like a standard component of a curriculum mapping project. However, from a leadership perspective, this was a strategy to provide professional security through aligned structures. So vague expectations are kind of the primary fuel for learning anxiety. When a roadmap is fuzzy, people naturally worry that their expertise or their lack of expertise will be judged. By establishing this consistency together, we remove the guesswork for folks. So liaisons weren't left to wonder if they were doing it right or wrong because they were operating within a unified framework that we built as a collective. This alignment meant that the new way of working was clearly defined, which is the direct antidote to the anxiety of uncertainty.
Another way we aligned our structures is by grounding our collections decisions in the program plan process. We created a rubric to assess how well our collections were aligned with academic programs by using curriculum mapping that linked our collection spending to student success and departmental needs. Positioning our liaisons as key stakeholders in our collection decision-making process made the work they were already doing with program plans take on new, tangible meaning. They weren't just filling out a rubric. They were able to apply the insights they were gaining through their program plan work to inform how the library spends its collection budget. By connecting our collection spending directly to student outcomes, we changed the budget conversation. A cut is no longer just an abstract percentage. It's a specific loss of support for specific programs. Once our liaisons realized the implications of their insights on the collections rubric, the mindset shifted. They recognized that they weren't just collecting data, they were essential advocates for the students in their academic programs.
Trina, you're muted.
Thank you. I knew I would do it at some point in time. It's like flashbacks to COVID era. So anyway, once we established those shared foundations, we needed a dedicated space where everyone could actually do the work without fear. So this is where our all liaison PLC or professional learning community we built for program planning came into play. In this phase, we provided targeted training with a context of safe experimentation by providing a program plan template that was explicitly framed as a drafting space. So we wanted to communicate that this wasn't a final exam. It was a living, evolving process. We held weekly meetings where the explicit goal was to ask questions, surface frustrations, and offer suggestions. To build trust, we made sure liaisons saw their feedback, changing our templates and processes in real time. If a part of the process wasn't working, we fixed the process. We didn't blame the person struggling with it. This lowered learning anxiety because the mistakes were actually seen as data to help us improve the process. We also prioritized learner control. While the structure of the program plan was consistent library-wide, each liaison had the autonomy to review their own programs and apply the framework in a way that felt authentic to their subject expertise. By engaging in this collective learning, we normalized the uncertainty of the change. We moved away from a culture where individuals were expected to just figure it out in isolation to one where the experts and the learners were working side by side. It shifted our mindset from I am being forced to change to we are building something together.
Next, we built on the momentum of the shared learning that our liaisons have been participating in so far by integrating program plans into official liaison responsibilities and the annual goal setting process. This wasn't about adding another to-do list. It was about recognizing the work as a core part of our professional identity. By aligning the process with accountability structures already in place, we ensured that the work is sustained through shared expectations. All of our liaisons understood their contributions were vital and that they weren't doing it alone.
But even with clear goals and a vision, the leap from internal planning to the increased or evolving style of external faculty engagement required by program plans felt like a high stakes ask for many of us. To support our people through that transition, we capitalized on the idea of partnership teams. For us, these are small liaison teams composed of librarians with similar subject liaison areas and a variety of library roles within collections, discovery, archives, and instruction. These teams met regularly to plan collectively, share resources, and coordinate department rollouts. By moving from an individual model to a team model, we created a social safety net and ensured that no one felt they were tackling a departmental challenge in isolation. As liaisons shared their program plans with departments, they're not just checking a box. They are supported by a peer network that has their back. These partnership teams have become our ongoing community of practice, where liaisons can share success stories, troubleshoot resistance, and hold each other accountable within a culture of care rather than a culture of surveillance.
We're going to take another moment here to pause and reflect, take a couple minutes here. So just think back to the challenge that you noted at the beginning of our presentation, and then any of the specific learning anxieties that you identified earlier. Which of the strategies we've just shared do you think you could use to address learning anxieties in your library? Please feel free to drop your comments in the chat. And so, Joanna, you asked a question, did all liaisons participate in these teams? Yes, they did at our library. Yes. Rebecca knows she's going to try using the vision piece. She said that's the giant missing piece for her in her area of work. And they would love to learn about our team model here at EKU. Jacob knows that peer learning communities are huge. Folks having a stake in the outcomes is key. He loves this. Yeah, thank you for recognizing that. It's a lot of work, but it's been worth it for us. Joyce notes the transparency with which your change was undertaken is enviable. Oh, that's nice. Thank you for sharing that. It's been a lot of work for us. Amanda says she's developing a team-based model, and she said this gives her hope, but she recognized that she needs to be more explicit about the vision. Yeah, I was going to say crafting the vision, definitely you do want to spend a lot of time making sure you get that right, because that's what really gets people on board. Regina knows that open communication between librarians and teams is important. Uh, they need the willingness to openly discuss feedback and make changes to build trust. Yes, building trust is definitely very hard. We tried to work hard to make sure we built that culture of care for our liaison teams. And then Kelly knows the collaborative communities are so important for success in these projects. Yes. So we're noticing a theme here, the communities of practice, the team-based model is resonating with a lot of our audience here. We agree. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing, folks. I'll move on here. So over time, the shared language and expectations around program plans facilitated our liaison shift from being uncertain or skeptical about the value of program plans to actively engaging with the program plan framework in their work. One liaison, who is not a teaching librarian, noted that the framework gave them a better sense of what was expected of them as a liaison. Another liaison appreciated how the program plans more clearly connected student learning with information literacy outcomes and helped them kind of broke it down to a more digestible form that they were able to understand more concretely. So our strategies for addressing learning anxieties associated with adopting a program plan framework were working. Our liaisons had internalized a shared understanding of the program plan framework.
So, as we moved forward, we saw this sense of safety extend beyond those partnership teams we mentioned through the emergence of cross division collaborations. For example, collaborations between our main instruction team and our archives team. Often, specialized divisions like archives can feel isolated and cut off from the quote, main unquote, instructional mission of a university library. Because we had a shared language and a safe environment to experiment, these groups started seeing how their work overlapped in the curriculum while highlighting exactly where archives fit into the broader academic program. The silos that we had previously operated in became to feel less like fortresses and a little more like neighborhoods. When people feel safe internally, they are much more likely to reach across the aisle and collaborate.
And then over time, this work started changing how the library was understood externally. I think one of the biggest shifts was that we were finally able to tell a more coherent institutional story about library impact. Um, I was able to go with a colleague of mine and presented to our provost cabinet about the work we were doing with the program plans, the collections rubric, our student learning outcomes, and it helped us create a shared language and shared expectations internally and externally. Because that internal understanding became more aligned, it became easier for us to communicate that out, communicate that value externally. Faculty departments could see more clearly how collections, instruction, and liaison work connected to their specific programs and to their specific student needs. University leadership, our provost, the deans, they could see the broader picture through mapped evidence, curriculum alignment, and program level planning. I saw a comment earlier where someone had said, there's all these competing priorities where we're asked to cut collections, but we're also doing trials, and there's a tension in that. But this type of mapping allowed us to demonstrate we're doing this trial because we've seen this collection gap. We're cutting this resource because we're noticing that it's not providing the support that we thought it was. And that shifted the conversation significantly. It moved away from generalized statements about how libraries matter and toward much more concrete conversations about institutional contribution. So, not just appreciation for the library, because the one thing we hear all the time is, quote, I love the library. But we want to move more towards recognition that the library is integrated into student success. It is integrated into these academic programs, and that while we do not award a degree, that degree could not be completed without our support. So, in a performance based funding environment, that distinction really mattered for us. But ultimately, we realized we couldn't effectively tell that coherent external story until this internal one felt rooted first. And once that internal alignment started taking shape in our external conversations, they were becoming more meaningful and much more strategic.
So, as leaders, we recognize that it's our responsibility to bolster the structures that prevent us from relapsing into old habits. And we're currently actively working on our refreezing stage, or the process of making those new behaviors permanent. In our refreezing stage, the goal is to codify our progress so change outlasts current leadership. We are making the new way of working the standard way of working. We started by integrating program plans into high-level conversations with university leadership and aligning our internal reporting so that the work and the evaluations speak the same language. We maintain this consistency through our partnership teams and embedded tools like our liaison playbook, where we outline processes and timelines to ensure this work outlasts current leadership. Again, these aren't just administrative requirements, they are repeatable paths that remove the anxiety of uncertainty. By standardizing these structures and revisiting our vision in semester retreats, we've moved from a one time project to a culture where staff see themselves as vital institutional partners. We've addressed that stickiness from our opening reflection by ensuring the structure around our people is as supportive as the vision itself. So, if you take one thing away from our experience, we hope it is this: you cannot power your way through organizational change with more administrative pressure. We started this process by helping our people feel capable of change, by prioritizing the human experience, acknowledging learning anxiety, and creating psychological safety. We turned a budget threat into an opportunity for professional and institutional growth. When you stop looking at organizational stickiness as a technical failure and start looking at it as a human experience to be supported, you create a culture where employees feel safe enough to evolve. So, with that, we are ready for Q&A if you are ready for Q&A.
All right, thank you. We'll start by, I want to thank you all three of you, very much for the presentation. So thanks, Ashley, Laura, and Trina. We'll go ahead and take some questions. It looks like we've got some questions already in the Q&A. Please feel free to add questions there and use the upvote feature to raise questions in the queue. Okay, so I'll start with what we have at the top here. So, well, let me refresh because there we go. Okay. How do you approach people who just don't like or accept change? They are willing to go along with the change, but they also continue to make it clear to everyone they aren't happy about it.
I can probably answer to a little bit of that, and I'm sure we all can. My team is the teaching and learning team, and so it's probably the largest team in the building. And in a lot of ways, probably the team that has the most it's a mixed team in terms of time in service in the position here, but it's probably also has a lot of really well established
Yes.
relationships on campus. So we
I was
have
going to say they're
liaisons.
most invested.
Yeah, they are very
Hmm.
invested because they see their faculty more frequently, right? We see them in the classroom. We don't just see them on the sidewalk. We don't just see them in faculty senate. We see them in the classroom, and it's a lot of relationship building. And some folks saw this as kind of like it felt maybe a little institutionalized or cold to them in the beginning. I think one thing that really helped was the partnership teams. One, because those create smaller groups where conversation and challenging and questioning is more comfortable, and those questions are kind of being answered by peers, not necessarily by leadership. I think another thing that helped was those early positive models, right? So it wasn't just the directors and associate directors sort of like laying down the law of the next new plan. It was their colleagues who they like we all respect each other, right? And we have grown, a lot of us have grown up in this library together. And while I want to think that these people that I used to work alongside with are comfortable with me as a leader to come and challenge me and question me, and I invite that, we can feel that all we want, but there's always going to be someone who is not comfortable with that, that kind of look at that hierarchy and say, I'm not going to put a, quote unquote, I don't want to put a target on my back. I don't want to look like the person who's, obstinate or whatever. So I think having it kind of come from the bottom up as opposed to the top down helped a lot. And then hearing people out. The Community of Practice PLC early on with the kind of rolling out the process of program planning, we were really open and responsive and very open that this is where we're at now, but this isn't finished. And we want you to finish it, right? We want to hear your feedback. We're going to modify it. And we would come back with each session with like, hey, this is what we talked about last time. You pointed out these issues, these obstacles, these barriers, and here's what we've done to kind of fix that. What do you think? Try it out. So that's a long answer.
And I would just add that we still have naysayers.
Oh, yeah.
There was someone a couple of weeks ago who said, I don't believe in the program plans, but I'm doing it.
Mhm.
And
I
so
think that
that's,
it was, I don't really buy in fully to the program
there you
plans,
go.
but I could sell it. And so like they're going to their departments and sharing that information,
Mhm.
even though they're not like they're fully committed to the work, even though they're not necessarily fully committed to the vision quite yet. They're still
Mhm.
sort of waiting, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm trying to create a structure that flattens hierarchy, shares power, and gives people a voice in decision making. All of these things are what my liaisons have said they wanted, but there is so much resistance to participate in change. How do I address the posture of, I want this to be different. I want to say a say in how it's different, but I don't want to do the work to make it different. Such softball questions you're getting here.
I know. And I'm looking at Laura, even though she can't tell I'm looking at her.
I again, it's so struggle because management is so personal. Like part of it is getting to know the people that you're working with, and so I'm recognizing I have people on my team that are kind of, or in the library too, that have been, they want to be they want to be at the table where the decisions are being made, but they don't want to be the one making the decision. They don't want to be the decision maker. And so there's parts of it where it's, um, you have to like recognize that there's some like that's a form of anxiety, right? Like they're feeling incompetent in a way. Like that's one way you could look at it. And so how do you address that? Like what are some ways that you show that they do have a valuable stake in this? Like that's one way you could approach it. Like what's a place at the table that they could participate without being the one having to make that decision. That's one way that you could let them be involved in the process. But again, it's so personal. It's like you have to kind of, I have a hard time kind of maybe answering that question fully without knowing who these people are. Um, I'm looking at Trina and Ashley to see if they have any
Yeah.
additional insights.
I can say like I'm hearing you say that like they kind of want the change, but like maybe they don't want to like they're not ready for the change in a lot of ways. I think one thing that helped us, and I don't know if this would help you. I don't know exactly where your struggles exactly are, but I think one of the things that helped us was making sure as much as we could in a environment of less with more, more with less, making sure that we made time and space for this work. And we sort of took that, we made that time and space by making these things a part of like our goal setting and evaluation process. So here we kind of do similar things that tenure track faculty do. We're faculty, but not tenure track. And so we set goals and professional responsibilities in service and in scholarship and creative endeavors. And so in professional responsibilities, we got the buy in from our dean that everyone would have a goal of developing one program plan in this evaluation year, right? Getting that out of the way. And then developing the research guides, which is another project coming down the stream that's related to that. So that allowed them to kind of like, because the goals is what's guiding our goals, guide us and prioritize our work. And so that made sure that that's the work that got prioritized, which gave supervisors the sort of clue in from the dean that this is priority. If they have to drop something else to do this change, then we do that. So I don't know if that would help in your situation, but I think it helped in ours.
Yeah, and I would just add that having, and I think this comes to Maoria's comment that she just made in the chat, if you have your peer models, so those people who are comfortable making decisions and being the ones who kind of establish that, then the folks who aren't comfortable making that decision, they're going to be able to participate in a community of practice. So you have your peer models who are setting kind of the standard and being the first ones who maybe make that mistake, they kind of mess up something, and then when you go into the community of practice, folks can then say, this step isn't quite working for me. Can we adjust it here? And they're seeing their peer model say, "Ooh, yeah, I didn't think about that." And so that makes it a safer environment and they get to participate in a way that's comfortable for them.
Great. All right. What was the most successful way that you showed the library?
Can you ask that again? I'm sorry, you cut out.
It's okay. I think my earbuds just died. What was the most successful way that you showed the value of the library?
I would just add that this has really helped us think about, so when we do our annual reports, we're rethinking about the type of data that we're sharing externally. So instead of focusing on cost per use, I'm going to talk from the collections perspective. So instead of focusing on cost per use, we're really honing in on how our students are using the library, how they're engaging with it. We're thinking differently about what that engagement means. So not necessarily like full text downloads, like that is the most important thing we would ever look at, but the act of engaging with us, period, that is meaningful. If you're searching, that is meaningful. That is a part of the research process. And so we've really been able to demonstrate that so one of the things is that we're able to talk to the provost cabinet and say, we have 177% usage when you compare that to our camp, like how many students we have on campus. 177% of students engage with the library on a weekly basis when you compare that to our campus community, where it really has helped us rethink about how we tell the story of the library instead of just they use JSTOR 377 times, and then how that specifically is impacting with departments. So even though this particular thing may not have the cost per use that we think it is, but we think it should, it is vital to this particular department in a way that we didn't realize. And so we are able to track that information and map it. And I think that makes me feel more comfortable about the money that we spend on our collections.
Okay. There's a question if you'd be willing to share your program plan template if you have one.
Yeah. We have all of this mapped out in a playbook. We have templates for our program plans. We've moved on to a project that's connected with that, where we're streamlining all of our research guides, creating course guides that map onto the program plan. So we would be happy to share all of that. And even the structure with which we went through this, because I think there was a question about how long this took. If I'm correct, we started in 2025 we actually started in 2024.
Mhm.
Actually, I think it was 2023
Oh,
because that's when I became associate director. And
okay.
that's when the
Yeah.
conversation really started.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm gonna just jump in and say the vision, crafting the vision is really what took the longest. That's why we're like hazy on the timeline because
mhm.
I swear you two, it was what, a year. And I'm just gonna jump in here too because I meant to share this earlier that part of crafting the compelling vision, you have to find your first followers at your institution, the people that are willing to buy into that vision early on. Because again, the more people see that there are others bought into the vision, the more they're willing to buy
Mhm.
into that themselves and then turn around. And you'll see that the acceptance of that vision spread. And so I was Ashley's first follower. Trenia was another. So we were kind of like middle managers at the time. And so we were able to work together to craft a compelling vision. We had to work with our dean. Like our presentation makes it sound like it was like we just presented to her one time and that was it. No, it was a repeated process of talking with her, touching base with her, circling back and making sure that she had fully internalized it. So I want to say that the vision part took the
Hmm.
longest.
Yeah, and then we presented the vision to each department so that they would see it before we started with because we didn't want to start with the peer model and have these people working on a project that no one else in the library was even knew was happening. So we went out and presented the vision to each of our departments as well. So it was it was 2023. Yes, you're right.
Okay. I struggle so much with unpacking, scapegoating, especially when it's down or sideways instead of upwards. Do you have suggestions for helping manage it while drawing lines about not lashing out at peers?
That's a really challenging question. And I don't know that it's one that I can say we have an experience with because you mentioned that there's scapegoating like laterally and below, like we're punching down. And I don't know that we had that exact scapegoating. Um,
Luckily, we had a villain, and
yeah,
the and the
Yeah.
villain wasn't us. The
yeah.
villain was our state government, which then kind of trickled to university administration, and we were just addressing the villain. And so we were
Yeah.
kind of able to lean on that. And so the scapegoating was really on state government and our university
Mhm.
administration, thankfully.
And that put us in a position to be able to say, like, yeah, I know it's their fault, but they're in charge, so we got to do something.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Scapegoating laterally and below, that's a hard one.
Mm.
Okay, so you touched on this question a little bit already, but I'm going to ask it explicitly. Curious about the timeline for each of these steps. Did they take place over a few weeks, months? Sounds like years total.
I'd say that the vision part was a year, but then
Hmm.
after that, what I'm looking at Ashley and Trina, probably what, a
Yeah, so
couple
what we
months.
ended up doing is we did a vision for about 6 to 8 months, just getting everybody on board. Then we created we call them ad hocs here. We created a program plan ad hoc, and that ad hoc started, I think, in like January of 2025, and it ran all the way through December of 2025. And what that ad hoc did was design all of the templates, create the process, and then that ad hoc also designed a professional learning community that started in January of now I'm a little messed up. January of 2025. Yes, so it was 2024 and then 2025. So in January of 2025, we did a professional learning community for 6 months during that spring semester. I guess it was 5 months, where everyone met weekly and we went through each step of the program mapping process, whether that was curriculum mapping, looking at collections, looking at syllabi, and then everyone was expected to have a completed program plan before that summer. And then that ad hoc then started working on the next iteration, which was taking those program plans and then mapping them into subject guides and then course guides. And that's where we are now. So that ad hoc then created another professional learning community that started this past spring, where we're walking through the process of taking that program plan and then mapping them onto course guides for departments.
Okay, so we're nearly at time. So I'm going to say the Q&A portion is done, but if folks' questions weren't answered and it's, burning a hole in their pocket, could they reach out to you all over email?
Yes, please.
Great. Okay. So then I would love if everyone could thank Ashley, Laura, and Trina for answering these questions and for a great presentation. It was really enlightening. I saw so much of my work in what you presented, so I really appreciate it. And then before we close out, we want to point out the evaluation survey is available for you to complete. I'm sure that the three presenters would love your feedback, and we as a conference would like it. And that link is also available in Sketch. If you're curious, it's labeled feedback survey. So thank you all for attending, and thank you presenters for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.